Crazy Rich Asians is a best-selling novel by Kevin Kwan that came out in 2013. Kwan started the project as a series of satirical short stories, inviting his audience to simultaneously judge his characters and covet their lives. It eventually occurred to Kwan that these short stories could be intertwined into a novel if he put a love story at the center. So he invented Nick Young and Rachel Chu as the center of his ultra-successful novel. When Crazy Rich Asians came out as a film in 2018, there was a lot of concern about how the film had to represent all Asian people, because there had not been a predominantly Asian cast of a Hollywood film in 25 years since Joy Luck Club. But once the movie was out in the world, the consensus was pretty clear. The representation of the Asian world in the film is far from perfect, but also, man, this movie is fun. And the almost all Asian cast was considered a harbinger of more Asian representation on American screens. After Crazy Rich Asians in 2018, in 2019, Always Be My Maybe, an Asian cast rom-com, was at #1 on Netflix, and Parasite, a Korean-spoken film, won Best Picture. And then, in 2022, Everything Everywhere All at Once, another almost all Asian cast film, won Best Picture. Whether Crazy Rich Asians was just ahead of this wave or the earthquake that caused it is up for debate. The movie follows Rachel, played by Constance Wu, and Nick, played by Henry Golding. Rachel is the youngest faculty member at New York University, and Nick is her hunky boyfriend who steals her desserts and plays basketball at the Y. Nick is about to go home to Singapore to be best man in his best friend's wedding and invites Rachel to go with him so she can meet his family. Rachel is nervous about meeting his family. While Rachel is Chinese, like Nick's family, she knows that there are quote-unquote right and wrong ways to be Chinese. But she also knows she's a catch. She says to her mom, "They can't not like me, right?"
What was that look? I saw that.
Nothing. It's just Nick. Bringing a girl all the way there to meet them can mean a lot to these overseas families. They're different from us.
How are they different? They're Chinese. I'm Chinese. I'm so Chinese, I'm an economics professor with lactose intolerance.
She goes off to meet her boyfriend's family with what seems like reasonable amounts of trepidation. But as soon as Nick and Rachel arrive at JFK to begin their journey east, Rachel learns that she doesn't know her boyfriend as well as she thought she did. Nick and Rachel get seated in crazy rich first class, and Rachel starts to realize Nick is rich. She tells him that it's kind of weird that he hid it from her, but they talk about it.
I mean, you have a Jamba Juice card.
You use my Netflix password. You play basketball at that Y that kind of smells.
I really like that place, thank you very much. And yes, my family has money, but I've always thought of it as theirs, not mine.
And Rachel is understanding. She clearly loves this man. When Rachel and Nick arrive in Singapore, they spend one blessed night with Nick's best friend Colin and his fiancée Araminta. Here is a brief vision of a life that Nick and Rachel can enjoy together, even in Asia. But then it's time for Rachel to meet Nick's family, and she confronts a kind of wealth that she has never encountered before. Here is our favorite film professor, Russell Mafe.
Even though she's somebody who in U.S. class systems would be seen as like someone who absolutely fits into very elite circles, and this system is kind of still seen as poor, is still seen as like not being one of them. And then she kind of becomes our way of like saying like, oh, look at how excessive wealth is. Look at how rich people take things too far.
When Rachel arrives at Nick's grandmother's compound, her fish out of water status is made very clear to us. She tries to drink water that is meant to wash your fingertips and confuses a maid for Nick's grandmother. Lucky for Rachel, her college roommate, Peek Lin, played by the hilarious Awkwafina, lives in Singapore and acts as cultural diplomat between Rachel and the young family.
Rachel, these people aren't just rich, okay? They're crazy rich. Look, there's new money all over Asia. We got the Beijing billionaires, the Taiwan tycoons, but the young family, they're old money rich. They had money when they left China in the 1800s.
Peek Lin dresses Rachel to meet the family and regularly runs interference between Rachel and the Youngs. What also becomes quickly clear is that Nick's mother disapproves of Rachel. And as the movie continues, Rachel gets hazed by most of Nick's friends and family. When she goes to Araminta's bachelorette party, Nick's ex-girlfriend and several other women put a crazy, huge dead fish in Rachel's bed. Astrid, Nick's glamorous cousin, who's dealing with a cheating husband of her own, is the only one who is kind to Rachel at the bachelorette party. She supports Rachel and helps her bury the dead fish. When Rachel gets back from the bachelorette party, she finally confronts Nick about how awful it's been for her.
I thought I was here to meet your family, go to your best friend's wedding, eat some good food. Instead, I feel like I'm a villain in a soap opera who's plotting to steal your family fortune.
And while Nick is sorry, he can't control Rachel's main adversary, his mother. Rachel almost gives up trying to attend the wedding, but Peek Lin reminds her, "You're a professor of game theory. Don't step down to these people."
Yeah, she's like trying to play a game of chicken with me, where she's like coming at me and like thinking I'm gonna swerve like a chicken.
But you can't swerve.
I'm not gonna swerve, not for her.
No, chickens are bitches, dude.
And I'm not a chicken.
You're not a chicken. You gonna roll up to that wedding, you gonna be like, bok bok, bitch.
Bok bok, bitch.
A shopping montage ensues in which Rachel emerges stunning and seems as though she is going to win this battle for Nick at the wedding. Until Nick's mom and grandmother confront Nick and Rachel. They've hired a private investigator and reveal that they've dug into Rachel's past.
I'm sorry to tell you, but Rachel has been lying to us about her family and her mother.
What are you talking about?
I hired a private investigator to look into her past. She said her father passed away in China, but that's not true. Your mother's husband is very much alive. During her marriage, she cheated on him and became pregnant with another man's child. And before he found out, she ran away to America. It's all in here.
You had no right.
He had every right.
You did not.
You're lying.
Do you have any idea the scandal this would have caused for Rachel to hide something like this?
This is all news to Rachel, and she runs away from Nick and his family back to Peek Lin's house. Then she falls into a depression, ignoring Nick and barely leaving bed, until her mother flies to Singapore and convinces Rachel to give Nick another chance. Nick proposes. Rachel says no. She doesn't want him to be cut off from his family just to be with her. As she plans to leave Singapore, she makes one final stop. A final showdown with Nick's mom, Eleanor, played by Michelle Yeoh. Rachel tells Eleanor that she has rejected Nick's proposal.
I'm not leaving because I'm scared. Or because I think I'm not enough. Because maybe for the first time in my life, I know I am. I just love Nick so much. I don't want him to lose his mom again.
This sacrifice is enough for Eleanor to give her blessing. After a classic rom-com chase through the airport, Nick and Rachel get engaged. The cultural context of this movie is very specific. It discusses the various cultural clichés of different Asian ethnicities at length, and reminders of colonial British reach in Singaporean culture is peppered throughout the film. Even so, it's located in a trope we know very well, that of the good poor girl and the miserable rich family. Here is Russell Mafe again.
we're experiencing it from her point of view, where she's like, oh my gosh, look at how big this house is. Oh my gosh, look at the extravagance of this experience. But then as it unfolds more, we see more and more that rich people are unhappy, that rich people are mean, that rich people are superficial, that they'll stab you in the back, and that wealth is a sign of this kind of degradation of the culture.
In the context of cross-class love, the story is clear. Wealthy people bring the money, but they need the not uber wealthy to remind them what it is to be human. In that way, this movie has its cake and eats it too. The wealth and opulence is a feast for the eyes, is entertaining to watch, and yet we get to feel somewhat glad that we don't have it because it would degrade our souls.
Like the bachelor party that's being organized by the friend who's not really a friend, who takes everything way too far, who's misogynistic, who's horrible in all senses of the word, and seeing that desire can easily spill into excess and disgust and kind of a repulsion against that type of excess.
Even Nick, who really is unlike any leading man in recent history, is kind of a cliche. He's the exception to the toxicity of wealth, seemingly untouched by the cancerous parts of unending money, and only left a sheen of prince-like qualities. Here is Russell Mafe once more.
You know, when they first arrive in Singapore and they go out with the friends who are getting married, even though everyone is fabulously wealthy, they go to a very middle class, working class, open market and are very relatable. He's hugging the vendors that he hasn't seen in so many years, right? There's a real delicate balance in figuring out how to depict that wealth and class. And then the film ends, of course, by completely leaving that unresolved and just being like, well, they're in love, so everything's going to be fine.
The divide between Rachel and Nick is the same as it was at the beginning of the film. But love, familial love and romantic love, triumphs. I'm Vanessa Zoltan.
And I'm Matt Potts.
And this is Hot and Bothered. So, Matt, we invited you on the show because we were looking for a cultural critic to come on the show. And whenever we're looking for a smart person, I have you on the dartboard of people who I'm considering. And you and your daughter, Cammie, had just watched the movie. And you texted me being like, what should Cammie and I watch tonight? Something like Crazy Rich Asians, because it's Cammie's new favorite movie. She cried through the whole ending.
I mean, she cried basically from the wedding on. From the wedding on, just waterworks. Yeah.
Okay, so I know you just watched this with Cammie, but what is your relationship with this film, overall?
I'm kind of ambivalent about it. I have very warm feelings towards it.
Yeah.
It's a great watch. It's just a fun movie. It's just a fun movie to watch. Yeah. You know, the story's great. It's funny. Awkwafina is great. It's a great movie.
So funny.
I also find myself while liking the movie saying but do I like what the movie is communicating? And I'm not sure I like everything that the movie is communicating all the time. One of the things I like is that there are lots of Asian people in this movie and they're playing the leads, especially romantic leads. Mm-hmm. Asians in Western movies do not tend to play the sexy leads in things, especially not male leads. So I like that. Mm-hmm. I like that Asian guys are hunky in this. in this movie, right? But then I'm also a little bit ambivalent because I'm half Asian. The lead of this movie is half Asian, but he's portrayed as fully Chinese. Is this Hollywood giving a little bit hey, we're doing an Asian lead, but also he can't look too Asian, right? So that's the ambivalence.
Yeah.
But multiple Asian men are just hunky pieces of meat in this movie. That's cool. That doesn't happen with Asians. I support that.
I know. There's a scene where you meet a character naked through his abs, and you don't see his face for 4 or 5 seconds. It is his naked abs. And I was like, you are teaching white people that Asian men make you thirsty too.
And the other thing is just representing Asians as the super rich. I think in Western culture, we think of the super rich not as Asians, or what it does speak to is the fact that we are not used to seeing Asian people as anything other than immigrants in the Western context. And usually it's immigrants who are working in a restaurant, building the railroads, whatever, right? And when you have these folks with this incredibly opulent lifestyle, it just gives the lie to that assumption. On the other hand, I'm not a big fan of that lifestyle, right? I don't like that's not the way I think people should choose to live or use their wealth. And so I love what it's working against. Don't know that I love what it's promoting as it works against some of those assumptions, right? So ambivalent. But overall, if I'm not thinking too hard, what a fun movie. Like I watched it with you last night. I watched it with Cammie a few weeks ago. I would watch it again in a few weeks if Cammie wanted to. It's a lot of fun.
Yeah. A lot of the conversation when the movie came out was about, right, like the rep sweats, this like representation fear where once your culture gets represented in a major Hollywood film, you feel as though it has to represent only good things about your culture. Yeah. You're like, we're finally on the main stage.
Yeah.
Don't tell them bad things. And so the hope is that this movie would make enough money that just we would see Asian main characters in all different walks of life. So not just restaurant employees and not also being so obscenely wealthy. But in theory, we're going to see more and more Asian stories. I think because of COVID, this trilogy didn't end up getting made entirely. So I don't know how successful. I'm curious. I don't know sociologically if we've had more Asian male leads.
I mean, I think that Everything Everywhere All at Once, that's a very Chinese immigrant kind of story, right? I think that's maybe not a direct result of this, but it's part of a movement which has maybe not gone as far as we might hope it would have if not for COVID. But
yeah.
And not just COVID, but also like anti-Asian stuff around COVID, like, right? Like,
yeah, not just lockdown.
Yeah, that's right. Not just
COVID.
Lockdown, but COVID. Yeah.
Right.
And you were speaking of the diversity of Asianness. And like, I just feel like as a Japanese American, like, I just want to chime in also that, this story is about ethnically Chinese people in Singapore. The fact that I'm Asian American, I think the story has a lot to do with like Asian American identity. And I look forward to us talking about that. But I also like, especially for our listeners, I don't want to pretend that the Japanese experience is anything like the Chinese experience. And specifically in the context of Singapore, because, the Japanese were guilty of war crimes throughout Southeast Asia. But also and especially in Singapore, like they colonized and occupied Singapore. They targeted the ethnic Chinese in Singapore. They killed between 25 and 50,000 ethnic Chinese, mostly young men, like awful, awful things. And I'm not trying to claim any expertise or knowledge about the Singaporean experience here, but I think the movie is, from Rachel's perspective at least, really about Asian American identity. And I do have some ideas about what it's saying about that. I mean, but just like being fully transparent with our listeners, when you first asked me if I would do this, I said like, no, a Japanese person doesn't have any business like talking about this, right? And I still have some like misgivings about that. But so just for our listeners, I want to qualify that like what I think I'm doing here and also what I know I can't do in this conversation.
I appreciate that. One other thing that I have to share, Matt, as we go into the love story of it all.
Yeah.
That this novel is based on Pride and Prejudice.
Oh, really?
Right. It sort of starts with the family dynamic of why Darcy wouldn't have proposed, but it starts with them together.
Interesting. Wow. Cool.
So, Matt, what does this movie believe about love?
I think it says that love wins.
Mm-hmm.
Like love is a powerful force that can triumph over obstacles.
Yeah.
I think this is true in a couple of different ways and not just romantic love, right? I think probably the relationship I like most in this movie is between Rachel and her mom.
Mm-hmm.
And you see what her mom's love for the man she left behind and for the daughter that she's raising, like just overcomes so much just in her life in Flushing that it's all in the background, right? But we know that she gets there and we know that her fierce commitment to her daughter, which is an echo of this deep love she had for this person who saved her from this awful relationship. It gets her out of like deep, deep structural awful stuff. And it's because she has this fierce love that she gets there. So like in that kind of favorite situation, that's one. But also like when she comes to see Rachel and Rachel's on the couch and Paquelin's family is super good to her, like Rachel gets through it because people take care of her and love her. And then there's the more, dramatic end of movie romantic scene where like everything is suggesting in the last third of the movie that it's not going to work out until it does. And it does because Rachel loves Nick enough to let him go, to let Eleanor win, to let Nick's mom win, right? And it's her love for him, which she signals to Eleanor by letting him go, that paradoxically or magically returns him to her through Eleanor, right? And so like love is magic and love wins.
I agree with all of that. And I love Rachel's love for her mom too, that she's so proud of her mom. She gets asked by Eleanor, by her boyfriend's mom. Tell me about your parents. And she's like, oh, I never knew my dad. And then she starts talking about her mother with such pride and affection.
And she's like, she's the queen of Flushing real estate. When like Eleanor, like the young family's in real estate and is literally the queen of like global real, and she's like so proud of her mom. And just has no sense of like
the irony.
Yeah, she's just like, oh my gosh, she is like so good at real estate in Flushing, Queens. I love that.
And she even says at another point, Rachel does, she's sitting at this big family with the Youngs, and there are like 10 people there. There are cousins and aunties, and everybody's making dumplings together. And even though she can't understand the language, she's smiling, and someone's like, oh, do you speak Cantonese? And she's like, no, I only speak Mandarin, but I just like love hearing you all talk.
Yeah.
And then she says, it was just me and my mom. She goes, which I loved, right? Yeah. She does have this, I loved it being just me and my mom, but this is also nice, which leads to what I think that this movie thinks about love, actually, is you're really different from how I grew up is a reason to fall in love with someone. Nick says, the reason I fell in love with you is that you're so different from how I grew up. And he says it again and again and again. You know, at one point he says, I'm not worried about Rachel. She doesn't need to be told what to do. She's a New Yorker. She's tough. She'll be fine. He just loves that she's going to be fine, that she doesn't care about these rules, all of the things that frustrated him about growing up. And that's the bridge for him to love all of these other things about her too, right? She's kind and loves her mom and loves her friends and is brilliant and, you know, the youngest faculty member at NYU. Like, there are obviously all sorts of other things to love about Rachel, but absolutely the thing that he first noticed about her is that she was different from how he grew up. And then she's sitting at this table making dumplings and being like, God, you have a big family and this huge house. Like, that's so nice too, right? That they're both liking each other for being different from them in some key ways.
Yeah. I mean, I think what you described there actually points to this theme of cross-class love that you're talking about, because she is different from him because she is not wealthy, right?
Right.
But the other difference which is really at stake, and that I think is important to think about, is the fact that she's American is also that she's different, that she grew up in America.
Yep.
And Rachel's mom knows that too, which is, you know, one of the early scenes in the movie. Like, she says to her, you're Chinese, you look Chinese, you speak Chinese, but you're not Chinese here and here. She points to her head and to her heart. Like, what it means to be Chinese is part of what's at stake in this question. That's part of the difference that appeals to Nick, but obviously is not so appealing to his family, right? And so, and part of the thing with Eleanor and the family is like, the cousins who don't like Rachel think that she's not acceptable because she's poor. Eleanor, it's not as clear. It might be because she's American.
I think that most of Eleanor's dislike of Rachel is that Rachel is American. I think there is a little bit of this thing of, I had to suffer when I got married into this family, so now you have to suffer too because I didn't get to pick you for my son. But her intellectual argument against Rachel is that Americans only care about their own happiness. And what she's saying is, and in Chinese culture, that's not the priority. The priority is to build a family history that lasts. And we see that thesis across class. There's a scene early in the movie, right when Rachel and Nick land in Singapore, where the best friend Colin and Colin's fiance, like this is the couple whose wedding has brought Rachel and Nick to Singapore. They go to like an outdoor market, and we hear in voiceover Nick explaining to Rachel, families have worked for generations on a single dish. And this is one of the only like cheap outdoor markets in the world where a single stall will have a Michelin star because it's so good. And that is in part because one generation after another, right? There's just like hundreds of years of experience in making this one kind of thing. And so we're shown that that's a Chinese ideal across class.
Yeah.
Poor street stall vendors and Eleanor, this multi-billionaire, share this idea that you build things over multiple generations. And so Rachel going after the career that she wants and Rachel saying, I get to go after things I'm passionate about. Eleanor is like, I'm not interested in that cultural perspective.
Yeah, I agree. And it's also when Eleanor changes her mind at the end, my reading on it is it's not because Rachel suddenly got wealthy enough to qualify, it's because she has communicated some sense of self-sacrifice or whatever. I'm not sure that's the language we want to use, but something that she thinks, okay, now I believe that you're maybe Chinese enough or not American enough to be part of this family. Right. Yeah.
Right. You're willing to not only go after your own happiness.
Right. Exactly.
Which is the perspective that Eleanor has on Americans.
That's right. Yeah.
Matt, the big thing that I think that this movie contributes to our ongoing conversation about cross-class love, something that's just clicking for me, even though we've talked about this in other episodes, we've talked about Titanic, and this is true, but it's really that it's the families who are the protectors of the separation of the social statuses rather than society at large. Or certainly it's not misunderstandings within the individual couple that is causing the problem. I can imagine in a cross-class relationship, real fights coming up around, like, even in this movie, right? Rachel could say to Nick, you are so rich and so privileged, it didn't occur to you that I might be made to feel uncomfortable by wearing the wrong kind of dress. Like, how dare you? Like, your wealth has made you blind to taking care of me. But that does not get characterized in this film. What gets characterized is our love is pure. Our love doesn't show us that our huge class differences is a problem. It's actually the wealthier family who is the keeper of the gates and is like, no, you cannot cross over. And I just don't know how real that is and how much that is a film romantic idea of what could keep people apart in cross-class love.
Yeah, I think that's a good point. I think you're right. I mean, I feel like that's a long plane ride to Singapore. When you get into the suite and you thought you were flying coach, you're probably having a long conversation about what are we getting into here, right? And like, is this something I want to get into? And like, how is this going to work? I could imagine a characterization of Rachel where that character would have a lot more misgivings. A character who might be just as willing to turn away from the relationship in that moment as Eleanor is for her son to turn away from it when they arrive. I think it probably can and often does go both directions.
And I think Constance Wu plays it so well in this way that Rachel loves Nick so much that she sees it, but she just can't fault him for it. In that scene, right, she says, smiling, like, I think it's kind of weird that you didn't tell me this. And he's like, I don't prioritize my family's money. And she's like, okay. We know that Rachel's not a character who's afraid of confrontation. Yep. And Rachel's not a character who is afraid of speaking her mind. I think she just loves Nick so much. She assumes good intentions and is like, I see your point of view. And so, it's just the family gatekeepers that are so stringent on making this an obstacle.
I think that's largely true, especially within the characterization of Rachel. But I think the movie is presuming that its audience wants to be super rich. Like, who would ever turn down this stuff, right? I mean, when Cammie watches the movie, she's like, oh, that's the wedding I want.
Yes.
Right? I think the movie is saying, like, why would a person who doesn't have money ever not want to live like this? Like, obviously, this is the way to live if you have the means. So like you, I don't think that's what Rachel's thinking. I think the reason is because she loves Nick so much, she wants to be as generous as possible in her interpretation of why he has failed or what he has failed to do, right? And so she's not thinking like, because what I actually want is to live exactly like this. I think the character of Rachel doesn't necessarily want that. And we see that in moments throughout the movie. But I think the movie kind of wants its viewer to want this, right? And also, like, I don't want this, but it's fun to imagine it for 2 hours watching this movie, right? Like so I can go there with the movie, which is part of why it's fun. But I think that is also operating.
The movie absolutely assumes its audience covets this while still satirizing the rich, right? The bachelor party scene in which they rent out or maybe buy some sort of like Air Force
cargo
carrier.
Ship? Yeah.
I don't know. Yeah, a cargo ship. I do think we are being invited to judge and choke on that. Yeah. But I would argue that the surprise engagement party at the end of the movie strikes me as just as ridiculous. And I think that we are supposed to covet that. So
yeah, exactly. Right. Yeah, right.
I totally covet the idea of having a last-minute engagement party where the Olympics synchronized swim team is performing while nobody watches.
Isn't that pretty standard for engagement parties? For day of planned engagement parties?
Yes. I don't know. I didn't know you when you got engaged. Is that what you guys had?
Obviously.
Yeah.
I mean, the other thing I'm interested with respect to cross-class love in this movie is just like how it maps onto and is shaped by patriarchy, especially the form that patriarchy takes in Asian culture generally. Again, I can't speak capaciously about as an expert about across all Asian cultures, but
across 2 billion people.
Yeah, right.
Know.
But they reference this in the movie. Like there's this strong theme of filial piety. There's a sense of family obligation. You're obligated to your family first. And this can be in contrast to a sense of like personal or individual happiness, right? Like these things can be in tension. Maybe, I think we should probably talk more about that, maybe at other parts of this episode. But because the Asian family is so often structured patriarchally, because it's through the male and the eldest male, what that means is that protecting the success of or the thriving of the family depends upon protecting the success and the thriving of the eldest male or the eldest male son or whatever, right? And so one of the things that's cross-class about this movie is also Eleanor. Eleanor doesn't come from the right class. She is training to be a lawyer. She gives up her desires in order to become part of this family. And she is never good enough before Amma, right? Like her experience is very much like Rachel's. But what she says is like, oh, I realized that my agency would be through A, serving my husband well, and B, serving my eldest son well. And so because I don't have agency other than through the men I serve, I am going to do everything I can to make sure that Nick stays loyal to me, that Nick succeeds because Nick is the extension of my own authority. Like all these very complicated things, right? It's just this cross-class thing, especially for the women in this movie, once it is mapped onto the way that filial piety and patriarchy like structure power in these settings, it just leads to really complicated relationships among the women who are trying to realize their own power through the men who have power in the culture. I also want to be clear, too, that like there's diversity in this as well. Like no Asians are the same. And even in the movie, we can see how this is playing out in different ways. Like Michael and Astrid are negotiating this problem in a different way than Eleanor and her husband, who never shows up in the movie, interestingly, and then Rachel and Nick. So again, this is not to say it's all one way in Asian culture or even in one city and state in Asia. It's just that like the questions of patriarchy and filial piety are complicating the way that cross-class love is played out.
And I think that is one of the purposes of the Go family, right? Awkwafina's family in the film. That is this nouveau riche family who is simultaneously a sort of rebellion to the Young family, right?
Yeah.
Like Awkwafina is like really booing Rachel to stand up to the Youngs. And yet they also worship the Youngs. So they simultaneously are the ones who are teaching Rachel, the Youngs are royalty. This is a really big deal. Like, you need to go to this wedding. You need to do this. We have to all bow down to it. And yet they're also showing an alternate way. There isn't an obsession with the oldest son in this family, right? Like, it's a much more chaotic, loving, ridiculous vibe in the Go house.
Like PK is the eldest son in that family, right? Which is,
yes.
And also, I mean, it's so great that you mentioned that because I started this episode talking about how like my theme of love wins, maybe it's most obvious in a non-romantic sense, right? The most beautiful forms of cross-class love in this movie are like between Pick Lynn's family and Rachel too, because they're rich and they're in a different class, even though they're not old money. And they are so good to her and so supportive of her. There are multiple dimensions of cross-class love going on. I think it's in lots of places, and it works better in lots of places in this movie.
One of the things that I think is interesting, and I just don't know enough about other than to call attention to it, note it, and then like slowly back away from it, is the fetishizing within the upper-class Chinese Singaporean culture of the British way to be, of, oh, Oxford, Cambridge, owning the hotel in London, all of the British brands, and just thinking that America is trash. And you also see that with the Go family, right? Pickling's dad went to Cal State Fullerton, and it's a joke that he went to like this trashy state school all the way on the West Coast. There's nothing about America that is covetable, and yet former colonial force in Singapore. There's a lot of British culture that we see in Singapore.
Yeah, I mean, this is one of the really complicated things about colonialism, right? And again, I'm speaking from the Japanese context, and Japan was a colonial power throughout Asia. They did it because they saw Europe and England colonizing the rest of Asia, and they were like, oh, we need to do it better than them. And so like they both adopted Western ways, like made a self-conscious decision in the 19th century. Oh, the Western ways are actually more effective. We're going to get beat if we don't adopt these, while also resenting the West.
Right.
It's obviously Singapore is a very different place, but we can see this in colonial and formerly colonized systems where the colonial life, colonial culture is both resented but also taken up.
Matt, I feel like we've already been talking a lot about not just what the movie is saying about love and cross-class, but what it doesn't necessarily know that it's saying, or right, what it's subtextually saying. One of the things that I have to say is subtext in this movie that I think is so funny. I just like cover my eyes and shake my head every time I think about it, is that Astrid, who's like the good one, she is a fashion icon, a philanthropist. She's like the richest of them all, and yet is the only one who's nice to Rachel, right? Like we literally see her be nice to a child in the first time that we see her in order to like show us, look, this is a good person. And at the end of the movie, she leaves her emotionally dummy-dumb husband who can't appreciate her for who she is and who resents how much wealthier she is than him and who he's just constantly feeling like he's not good enough for her. And she finally leaves him. And we're so proud of her because he's been cheating. And the way that we know that she is self-realized as an independent person is by putting on $1.2 million earrings shamelessly. And I'm like, I don't think that is something she should be shameless about. That's weird.
That's right. That's weird.
The text is, look how cool she is. She is unashamed of her $1.2 million earrings. But the subtext to me is, this woman has weird priorities. We are told again and again what a philanthropist she is.
Yeah.
Donate that 1.2 mil, Astrid.
Another subtextual thing going on in this movie is that there's a deep anxiety about Asian Americanness, I think, in this movie. And this is where, as an Asian American, I feel like I do share some identity with it. But I also think the movie at the end doesn't quite resolve that anxiety. Let me try to talk you through it, right? Which is that anxiety about authenticity is part of the Asian American experience. I'm not sure if that's true for other like immigrant ethnicities in the Americas, but it absolutely is true for Asian Americans. And I think just having worked with a lot of students who are Asian American, not necessarily Japanese American, it seems to me that it's a pretty consistent experience. Like, because we grow up in the States, like Rachel's mom says to her, even if you look and speak Chinese, and frankly, I don't look Japanese or speak Japanese, right? But even if you have those things, like if you grow up here, there's just something different in the way you think and the way you feel, which signals a difference. And it's not even if you grow up here. Like, I know a Japanese guy who grew up in Japan and then went to high school and college in the States, went back to Japan to work. And in Japan, he's not regarded as truly Japanese because Japanese school culture and work culture is so much a part of the shared experience of Japanese-ness that he's not quite in, right? So authenticity, like what it means to truly be a part of these social imaginaries, depends upon truly being a part, like at every stage of these social formations, right? And so the fact that the movie starts with Rachel's mom saying to her, you're not Chinese here, you're not Chinese there. And the fact that Eleanor also says to her, you're not Chinese, you're American, right? Says the same thing to her, basically. It is what's at stake. And the way that Rachel proves she is Chinese enough for Nick is by saying, oh, I will give up as you said before, Vanessa, I will give up my own happiness for Nick's family. And that convinces the mom. And so the mom gives her permission and Rachel gets to have it all. To me, I think what's interesting, what's going on is like in the way that maybe the romance genre does, like she gets to have it both ways, right? To me, this is a meditation upon the Asian American anxiety around authenticity through the genre of romance, where like Kwan creates this perfect situation where the way that she can express her authenticity as a person who is truly Chinese is also to get exactly what she wants, which is the happy ending, right?
Which is the American.
Which is the very American thing. So she is Chinese American. You made it, right? Like you are both.
Right. I'm actually going to bestow your full Americanness back to you by creating the conditions by which you can be happy.
Right. Like the only way she can get to happiness, which is the American goal, is by being fully Chinese, which is this, right? And that's just like I just kind of feel like Eleanor in real life, quote unquote real life, is just like, thank you for doing the right thing. We look forward to, you receiving a notice of Nick's engagement later on this year to somebody else.
Right. You will not be invited.
You will not be invited, no.
Matt, we have a segment whenever we have an academic or an expert on the show where they get to do an emergency stop of the episode and teach me something. So what is it in the context of this film that you would like to give a brief academic lecture on?
Vanessa, I want to tell you about subjectivity formation in the West and in the East.
Okay, Matt, teach me things.
Okay, I'm talking to you about subjectivity formation, right? So subjectivity is a technical kind of philosophical term, actually a relatively recent term for just like a sense of self. Where does your sense of selfhood come from? And traditionally in the West, subjectivity is regarded as fairly individualistic, right? Like you have a selfhood. This is probably derived from Greek and later Christian conceptions of the soul. I mean, actually, the Christians got this from the Greeks probably more than they got it from their Jewish ancestors. But like this idea that, every individual has within themselves a distinct and unique soul, like it's something that's essentially just you, which is the most you of you. And part of what self-fulfillment looks like is letting that selfhood be realized, that absolutely unique thing that is only yours being realized. That's what selfhood means, is allowing that to thrive and come to fruition. Whatever. That's a lot of the way that selfhood works as it's conceived, as it inherits it from the Greek philosophical tradition. What that also leads to is like a sense of like discreteness from other individuals. And in fact, the idea that others would encumber us in some way. Because of that, and this is something that the philosopher Hannah Arendt really thinks about in careful ways, because of that, it actually leads Western thought to recoil from relationship. Because other people are unpredictable, because I don't know what another person's going to do, the way for me to protect my own self, which is internal to me, is to isolate. And so the most realized form of freedom, for example, in Western thought is when I am fully unencumbered by other people, right? That means I am free to be myself. Exactly, right? Whereas the Asian sense of subjectivity or the Asian sense of selfhood is a little bit different. It tends to think about the self as constructed in relationships to others. Mm-hmm. Who I am depends upon my relationships to other beings. This derives partly from Buddhist thought. In Buddhism, the idea is that any individual thing actually arises in relationship with other things. The kind of English translation of the technical term is independent co-arising. So things arise together. But a good relational way to think about it is one of my core senses of identity is that I am a father. But I actually don't get to understand myself as a parent unless there are children. Mm-hmm. That's co-arising. That very essential sense of myself and my identity depends upon others, right? And so there's this more relational thing going on in Asian thought. And therefore, having obligations to another isn't something that we should turn away from that constrains our freedom. It's actually constitutive of who we are.
Yeah.
My obligations to others around me are actually essential to who I am. And this is where ideas of filial piety become really core. And the reason I bring this up is because, especially in the West, the Eastern version is kind of caricatured as a suppression of the self.
Right.
It's not at all. It's just the self is understood as caught up with others, and therefore obligations to others build up the self rather than tear it down. And I think it's important just to remember when we're thinking about this movie or reflecting upon this movie, because this is part of what's at stake in the questions around the choices Rachel makes, the choices Nick makes, the choices other characters in the movie make, Eleanor, others. There are certain ways that a person who has assumptions about the Eastern tendency towards self-annihilation, which I think is a misreading, who would see Rachel choosing against her happiness as saying she's just trying to suppress her sense of self-identity. Or she's opposing her own self-fulfillment, right? Whereas I think another reading would be her self-fulfillment is bound up in the way she has obligations to those others, the way she understands her obligations to others around her. And so even though it's working against her own happiness, there is a way in which she is asserting her own selfhood, a particular kind of vision of selfhood through a choice like this.
Matt, I'm so thankful to you. That was so helpful. Especially, I was really thinking a lot about the mahjong scene in this movie, which I think is sort of like the war scene, right? It's the battle, the most explicit confrontation in the film. And I don't know enough about mahjong, even though I know a lot of Jewish women play mahjong. This is a place where our cultures really come together. And by our, I mean Chinese and Jewish.
I'm pretty sure they play mahjong in Japan too. But like that, neither of us know it at all.
Neither of us know it.
So let's talk about it.
Well, I read an article.
Oh, good.
Explaining what happens in this mahjong scene. And apparently what happens is that Rachel has invited Eleanor to come play mahjong with her at like a mahjong hall because Nick has just proposed to Rachel and we don't know what the answer is, but Rachel says to Eleanor, he proposed to me yesterday and I said no. And so they start playing mahjong, and Rachel is a game theorist, and we know from the opening scene of the movie that she knows how to win a game, right? We watch her win a game of poker in the opening scene of the movie, and it's like she can win any game because she understands game theory so well. And she loses, and Eleanor sort of proudly is like, haha, I win. And then Rachel shows her tiles and shows, yes, but I let you win. I could have won. Here's this piece. And I think, you were talking about this earlier, that it is Rachel behaving, quote unquote, in the Asian way that allows Eleanor to give her permission for Rachel to realize herself as a Western identifying person. But I do think that it's actually Rachel still being Western because she shows her hand.
Yeah.
She's not sacrificing. She's saying, look, I know how to sacrifice. I choose in my independence and in my identity to sacrifice. And so I think it shows us that Rachel can step into both subjectivities. But I would argue that by sacrificing Nick, but performing the sacrificing of Nick in the mahjong game is actually in the Western subjectivity, not the Eastern subjectivity.
That's interesting.
And Rachel says it explicitly, right? She's like, thank you for this trip, because now more than ever, I don't need your approval. I know I'm enough. I know my sense of self-worth. She literally says it.
I mean, on my reading, we can disagree on this, right? I think the cultural expression of it is very Western, which is why it's a Chinese American move, right? The cultural expression is like, I'm going to assert, like, you should know that I won, right?
Right.
But in her understanding her own self-actualization to be caught up in her obligations to others than herself, like not just what I want most, but what Nick wants or even what you want, or how Nick would think about what he wants from you and from me, like that is actually thinking about like, oh, I'm going to get to be who I most fully am if I place my own desires in the context of other things I desire, like the happiness of other people, right? Like, I've been in some amount of therapy in my life, and I've had therapists, who I think have an insufficient understanding of Asian conceptions of the self, because their answer would often be, oh, self-actualization for you means like changing a particular relationship to family members, right? Which I think in many cases they were right, but also that they were also inadequately considering like the degree to which family obligation grounds the sense of self for Asian people. And I think that sense of family obligation still does ground what Rachel's doing in this scene, but her expression of it is absolutely Western, right? Because I'm going to let you win, but I'm going to let you know you didn't actually win. I'm going to perform it in a public way, and I'm going to walk off. My mom's going to give you a look as we walk away, right? Like this, right? That is very much like Gun Down at the OK Corral could not be more Western, right? Like,
right.
Yeah.
Well, Matt, next week we're going to talk about the ending of this movie.
Can't wait.
Thanks so much for coming on.
Thank you, Vanessa.
So I might have been behind the time, but I learned the term rep sweats in coverage of Crazy Rich Asians. There was so much coverage of concern about how this movie was going to represent Asian culture, given that the most recent movie to come out with a predominantly Asian cast was in the 90s. I think that there was a lot of rightful concern. And the movie came out and it was this huge splash and it was this huge cultural moment. And we talk about that a little bit in the episode, but we thought that this was a big enough cultural moment that we should just get an expert on the podcast to talk about this. Jiayang Fan is on the editorial staff of The New Yorker and the author of a forthcoming memoir about her relationship with her mother, immigration, and identity titled Motherland. She regularly writes about social, economic, and political issues in China for TheNewYorker.com, and she's the author of How to Watch Crazy Rich Asians Like an Asian American. Let's get Jiayang on the phone. Hi, Jiayang.
Hello.
Thank you so much for coming on to talk to us about this movie. The first thing I just want to hear is, do you remember how you felt about this movie when it came out in 2018?
Yes. Watching it is entwined for me with the anticipation. I don't know if you recall the buildup to this movie. The books did really well. And especially in the Asian American community, there was just palpable excitement. So I can't remember the movie watching process without also swimming in the memory of the joyousness of this almost like a big holiday that was going to come.
Yeah.
And I remember being really overcome with what abundant fun it was. It was fizzy, it was glitzy, it was fabulous. There was the requisite dose of intrigue and melodrama, and it was dazzlingly picturesque.
Yeah.
I had a really good time. And again, that is interwoven for me with the fact of it being just such a landmark moment.
Yeah.
Knowing that all Asian cast could hold down such a major commercially viable movie. It did feel both personally really joyful, but also politically meaningful.
Yeah. Looking back at how quickly that just kept getting confirmed, right? Always Be My Maybe comes out in 2019. Parasite wins Best Oscar for 2019, right? You just have more and more Asian representation in mainstream theaters in the United States coming so quickly. Do you have a theory on, like, did Crazy Rich Asians prove something that, like, white people were going to go to Asian movies? Or was there some sort of other cultural shift that all of these great movies sort of started coming out around the same time?
I think a few things were happening then. I think that the confidence it took to make a movie like this, it was a big budget film. It took so much time and energy and money to make. It took confidence to make, but it also gives the culture confidence about the viability of a minority cast. And I think first and foremost, it proved to America and the world that a movie with just Asians didn't have to be for an Asian-only audience, that it could command that sort of cross-racial, cross-cultural audience. I think in that sense, it probably did lay the groundwork for future funding. It also encouraged creativity, I assume, about what Asian films could be. And I think most importantly, it began to prove the possibility that an Asian cast film didn't have to be only about Asian issues. It could be about universal themes. Like an Asian rom-com is just also a rom-com, anchored by people who are first and foremost humans who also happen to be Asians.
Right.
I think it did that. And I think the latter thing, I think, is almost maybe more important, that yes, these faces that you see are yellow tinged, but really they're just about humans. They're about love and loss and heartbreak and freedom, lack thereof. And these are things that all humans experience. And yes, the characters, the actors and actresses playing them might be Asian in ethnicity, but that you, the audience, could identify with them, nevertheless.
So I know that you watched the movie again last night. I'm wondering, 6 years after its release, how you feel about how it holds up. Still fun and fizzy?
Well, I watched it on a much smaller screen underneath my bed covers on my iPhone, 13 or whatever. So it was a smaller experience. I still had a lot of fun. The opulence was something that even 6 years later, I found myself just awed. But it did remind me when you're a kid and a new ride opens up at the amusement park, you line up for the novelty and you can really enjoy the ride, but maybe it's not the kind of ride you want to go on day after day.
Mm-hmm.
It was worth the line the first time, but it's not the kind of thing that you elect to go on day after day. And I think that upon second watching, I noticed that you begin to see the manufactured nature of its exuberance.
Yeah.
The exuberance is still there, but you also see how it is very much made through every single glassy surface and chandelier and just conspicuous consumption on every single level.
Yeah. It starts to curdle a little bit.
A little, there's that. And also, you asked about how it compares to some of the Asian cast films that come after. You do feel like this was a pioneer project, but it was also one that is trafficking still in many stereotypes about Asians. You understand that to greenlight such a big budget project, it needed to meet where the culture was. And American culture at the time, its understanding of Asian culture is so shallow that the film has to almost stoop to where the culture is at. So I'm not necessarily blaming, faulting the creators, but that results in a film that can be quite shallow at times, and it's mainly dealing with characters that have to sometimes be stick figures.
Can you give an example of the kind of thing that you're like, this is pretty shallow and has been better represented since, potentially?
Yes. I mean, let's go to the Rachel Chu character, the female lead.
Yeah.
In Crazy Rich Asians. She's in the Pride and Prejudice version of this. She is the poor but spunky Lizzie that the rich cream puff boy meets. So she's an economics professor at NYU, and the film opens on this spectacular lesson that she gives on game theory. And what struck me on second watching was how that character is built on this performance of both virtuosity and virtue. She is the one who you see, like, she is so smart. Let me show you, like, she's an economics professor. Also, she's so virtuous. See, she could have, really stuck it to the mother, but she chose not to. And yes, that is the message that is being fed you through the film, but it doesn't really kind of becomes needed, KNEAD, needed into the texture of the movie, by which I mean, for example, if we take a later Asian American dominant cast, I mean, Everything Everywhere All at Once, a movie similarly about intergenerational trauma, free will and responsibility, the messiness of love and pain. These two films engaged many of the same themes. And yet, in Everything Everywhere, a film that is, I think, wonderfully unclassifiable, you see the messiness of the daughter character, and most, I think, emphatically, the mother character.
Mm-hmm.
And in that character, her strength and her intelligence and her perseverance are not things that are performed. I mean, yes, this is a movie, but in terms of how we, the audience members, engage with those features of her personality, we experience them through her emotional core, through her jumping through these various universes that confuse us, the audience members, as much as it confuses her. And that is a huge difference from the Rachel True. When she is winning in game theory, we, the audience, are not like, oh, like, we are so smart. We're like, no, Rachel's really smart. And that's a huge difference in terms of how a film leads you into depth of engagement. When you feel the inside of the character, I think that's where a movie is kind of running on all cylinders. And in Crazy Rich Asians, Rachel, we believe that she is smart and that she's spunky, but we also feel that we are watching her, a completely separate being, rather than identifying the parts of her that's in all of us. And I think that was a huge, positive leap for a film that is engaging with many of the same themes.
Yeah. Thank you so much for coming on and for your profiles on Awkwafina and Constance Wu and all of your coverage of culture in general. We're just so grateful for your time.
This was so much fun. I really enjoyed being able to think through my own engagement with these films.
You've been listening to Hot and Bothered. We are running a Patreon push this month. And so if you would like to help us make this show more sustainable so that we can talk to amazing people like Matt Potts and Jiayang Fan, then please consider supporting us on Patreon at patreon.com/hotandbotheredrompod. We are a Not Sorry production. I'm the executive producer. We are edited and produced by Ariana Nettleman and distributed by Acast. We love our soulmate level patrons, and this is a tier that you can join. And I could be saying your name right now. Your ad here on this bench. Molly Reilly, who we would chase through the airport to declare our love to. Becky Boo, who we would wait for hours on the top of the Empire State Building for. Elizabeth Schweinsenberg, whose heart we would play a game of one-on-one basketball for. And Lauren Bayer O'Connell, who we would call up on stage to dance with us in front of the whole summer camp. Special thanks this week to Jiayang Fan and to Matt Potts. And to our wonderful team, Julia Argy, Nikki Zoltan, Anissa Ahmed, Danny Langley, AJ Aramas, Courtney Brown, and Stephanie Paulsell.